Okay, so we're going to do a little video all about container growing and growing media. So this is a topic within the theory level 2 R2114, which is growing under protection. So obviously if you're growing in a greenhouse, you're often growing everything in containers. So that's why it's really important to get your potting media just right, because it's a really limited root zone. You want it to hold on to moisture but not stay saturated. You want it to hold on to nutrients. You want it to be something that's stable and doesn't change. And you want it to have lots of air in it. So it's really important to get your potting media right for your containers. So the first question is, why would we not use garden soil to pot up our plants and grow them in the greenhouse? So this is supposed to represent a pot full of garden soil. You can see it has been sat outside, at least this one. Well, the thing is, depends what your garden soil is like. If it's a clay soil, you've got a very compact texture, there's no air in it, it will hold on to the water. If it's a very sandy soil, it will lose the nutrients and the water, and you will have weed seeds in it that are dormant at the time, but they'll all germinate. You'll have disease spores in there. You may even have some pests in there like vine weevil and slug eggs. So that's lots of reasons why you wouldn't use your garden soil to grow your plants in. So let's put that to one side at a minute. So you can make some of your own growing media by composting. We've mentioned before in a podcast that you can make seed sowing compost from leaf mould if you let it rot down really fine. So you can do that. That's a sustainable way to do it. And you can use your garden compost for potting on larger plants. But usually the lazy way I normally do it is to go to the garden centre and buy a bag of compost. And the advantage of that, of buying the bagged compost, is you know exactly what is in it, you know the nutrient content, it tells you whether it's for seeds or for potting on, so that indicates how much nutrients are in it. You know if it's got peat in it or it is peat free, and you know if it's got soil in it, so you know what you're getting. Also, this has been sterilised at some point. You can't say it's completely sterile, but it won't have weed seeds in. They should have been killed off in the process, and it shouldn't have disease spores in it either, so you're not going to get that problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the main two types of kind of bulky compost that you can buy, and then we're going to have a look at the things that you can add to it. So on this side we're going to look at loam based or soil based or John Innes compost. Those three headings all mean the same thing. So this is compost which is made from garden soil which has been sterilised and processed. So it is made up mainly of rock particles. So here's a sample here. So this is some John Innes, I think it's seed sowing compost because it's very fine. If you feel it, it does feel quite gritty because it's got sand in it. So this will feel a lot heavier compared to our organic composts. It's really important to remember though that there is still some organic matter in a John Innes compost, and that is quite often peat. So this is not peat free. There will be some peat in a John Innes mix. So let's have a look at some different John Innes formula. So you can buy John Innes seed compost. So we've got two here, just made by different companies, but it's the same recipe. So you would get the same recipe in both those bags. Okay, so that's John Innes seeds. So that's very low in nutrients, very fine for sowing your seeds. And then we've got John Innes number 1 for young plants, so a bit more nutrient in. And then I've jumped to John Innes number 2, number 3. There is a 2 obviously in the middle, but as you go up the numbers, the nutrient content increases, and it tends to be larger plants. And then there's also I think there's a John Innes potting compost as well. Is there a final potting compost that's quite rich? No? Okay, so does it end at 3 then? Yeah. Oh yeah, the ericaceous. There is an ericaceous one as well, where the pH is different, so it's going to have a lower pH, so it's suitable for your acid-loving plants as well. So we've got John Innes seed, John Innes cutting compost, there is, isn't there? And then there's 1, 2 and 3. So that's your John Innes. So the advantages of John Innes is it is a bit heavier, so if you've got say plants in a conservatory, say, some of the yuccas are really tall, it would be really helpful to have a heavier compost at the base so they don't topple over. So the weight is sometimes an advantage, and yet in a large commercial greenhouse it would be a disadvantage, because if you had hundreds of pots on a bench, they'd be very heavy. So that's your John Innes. So let's now have a look at our organic composts. So the organic part of these could be wood fibre, bark that's been rotted down, wool or bracken or coir, lots of different types, green waste as well. Lots of different types of organic matter are used in these composts. So I've just mentioned coir. So coir is a waste product from coconuts, so obviously it has to be imported, so there's lots of air miles involved, even though it is a waste product. And you can buy it often as these solid bricks that you then they swell up if you pour some water over them. So they're nice and light and easy to transport if you're going around doing community gardening. That's the advantage of those. And this is it when it's been wetted and broken down, so it has a lovely fine texture, but it does vary depending on where you get it from. Sometimes it's quite fibrous and sometimes it's quite fine, but it does hold on to water well, but still maintains airspace, so it is a good growing media. We've got some other examples here. So I mentioned wood fibre and green waste is another type of organic growing media. So this is some of this one here, actually, New Horizon plant compost, and you can see the little bits of wood that have broken down. You can see that is made from wood fibre. It may have green waste in it as well, I'm not sure, I'd have to read the back. And then the final type of organic matter I've mentioned was a wool compost, which also has some bracken in. And we've got a seed sowing wool compost here and a potting on wool based compost here. So and obviously our other type of organic matter is peat, but what we're aiming for is something that's peat free. We've just done a podcast about sustainability and we didn't get around to talking about peat, but obviously we're going peat free. It's not sustainable. It's a specific habitat for lots of things you don't find elsewhere. It holds the carbon, it holds moisture and prevents flooding. So lots of reasons why we shouldn't be using peat. So ideally, and what we do here is we use peat free compost. So let's just finally have a look at these, the contents of these different bags. So these here are all peat free. And you can see it always says on the front peat free. Now, and then you can have a look on the back and see what is it actually made of. And you can see for this one there is some wood fibre in there and there is some coir. Okay, so that's what the organic matter in that one is made from. This one's peat free, it says peat free, and it's wool with some bracken in. This is again the same one, just a different type of mixture for potting on, peat free. And then this is my favourite actually, this is Silver Grow, which is made from wood fibre again and is peat free here, and also says sustainable growing medium. which it is. So those are all peat-free options. Oh, we've got one more actually. In really big letters there, peat-free, multi-purpose. So actually multi-purpose is another type of compost I've not mentioned. We've mentioned seed sowing 1, 2 and 3 and potting on. Multi-purpose, as the name suggests, has lots of purposes. You can sow seed into it, you might need to sieve it, and then you can pot your first young plants into it and it will keep them going for about 6 weeks. But it doesn't contain a lot of nutrients, but just enough to keep them going. So those are our peat-free. And then you might look at these 2 bags, particularly this one, where it says peat reduced formula. You might think, oh, it must have only a tiny little bit of peat in it. But then if you turn over and have a look, there's actually between 40 and 70% peat in that bag of compost, which can, 70%, that's high. And the same with this one. This is a different manufacturer. But you can see here, I don't know, it's a bit crafty, I think, the way they display the information. Again, that's around 70%, that tick, isn't it? So they are not peat-free, so I would avoid buying those. So let's have a look at some of the things that we can add to our bulky compost mixes. It's like making different recipes, really, because different plants need different types of growing media. So all these things on this side next to our loam-based composts are all types of minerals. Some have been processed, some haven't. These 2 here, both been processed. We've got vermiculite here, and if you look at the individual grains, they have like layers within them. So they can trap quite a lot of moisture, but also aerate your growing media. And this is made from micas, which have been sort of processed and heated, so they are made from a rock. So vermiculite is often added to open up the compost, but it also helps to retain moisture. So that's your vermiculite. You can also use it to cover seeds as well. It's really good for that because it holds onto the moisture well above the seed. Then over here we've got our perlite. So these are more like a Rice Krispie, somebody told me, and I totally agree. But you can, grind them together. They're not rock hard, you can sort of crumble them between your fingers. Now this is a volcanic rock which has been mined and heated up and processed. It does hold on to some water on its surface. It does have tiny little pores on its surface. But this one does tend to open up your compost more, has more airspace in it compared to vermiculite. So perlite, personally, I use this for a lot of cuttings to open up the compost because cuttings like a very, very open compost. So then at the front here, we've got something that we recognise more as rock. So if we start off maybe with our smallest one, we've got very fine silver sand, which is very, very fine sand particles. And then if we move over here, we've got some grit sand. So there's a bit of grit in there, these bigger pieces, and a sharp sand. It's more kind of jaggedy. So you get a little bit more aeration with this between the spaces. And then just one size up is potting grit. So you can see how the rock sizes gradually increase. So these ones here again, you would add to things like cacti. So you'd add some grit sand to a cactus mix, maybe with some multi-purpose organic compost or John Innes compost. You can use some of these for mulching. Potting grit's really good to mulch on the top to stop the container losing water. I don't know if there's anything I want to say any more about growing media. So yeah, just check, is it soil based or organic based? Is it peat free? And then what would you add to it for that particular plant that you're growing? Obviously your mixture, your recipe will determine how often you water them, how you irrigate them, how much they hold on to nutrients. So for commercial growers, they'll actually send an order in where these are processed for a particular mix and proportion of the grade of the compost. It's a fine art, and somebody once told me that amateur gardeners get all the stuff that went through the sieves commercially, the fine dust stuff, and they get all the fibre that was left on the top of the sieve. And that's why some bags of compost are completely horrendous when you open them, and they're just awful. But I do think that has improved lately, and Which Gardening always do a review of different composts, so it's worth, if you are a member, to have a look and see what they recommend, because it changes every year which composts are good and bad. Aldi had a bad reputation a couple of years ago. I don't know what it's like now, but hopefully they'll have improved. Hopefully they can improve looking after their plants outside their stores as well, rather than leaving all the tender ones in the frost. But anyway, that's another story. So that's it for now. Growing media and recipe ingredients.